Welcome to the Organic Wine Podcast. I'm Adam Huss, coming to you from Los Angeles, California. Thanks so much for listening. Just a reminder that if you enjoy this podcast, giving it a positive review on iTunes or other podcast apps is a huge help and much appreciated. Thank you. Also, if you have any feedback or questions, you can reach me at info@centraliswine.com. That's info@centralaswine.com. Here's a question for you. Would you make or sell wine if you didn't have access to organic fruit? I know that's a very hypothetical question, but it does get at the core values I'm trying to promote with the Organic Wine Podcast. Because the secret truth is, this isn't a winemaking podcast. It's a farming podcast. While as a winemaker, I'm personally fascinated by learning a lot of different winemaking techniques, styles, and chemistry, and sharing them with you, I really couldn't care less if you make a strict 0-0 wine or if you pitch yeast and add 100 parts per million sulfur. The choices we make in the cellar impact wine flavor, sure. But these are mere preferences. The choices we make in the vineyard impact the global ecosystem and the health of all humans and life living in it. Farming choices are moral choices. To me, they are on a completely different and more profoundly important level than how you make your wine. So if you care so much about the farming that your answer is no, you wouldn't make wine if you didn't have access to organic fruit, then you're probably someone I'd like to get as a guest for this episode. Please get in touch. My guest for this episode is Paul Dolan. As winemaker and then president at Fetzer Vineyards, and now being involved in many projects related to regenerative organic wine and farming, Paul Dolan has always been a pioneer leading the industry towards a more sustainable future. While at Fetzer, Paul proved to the California wine industry that wineries and grape growers can preserve and enhance their environment, strengthen their communities, and enrich the lives of their employees without sacrificing the bottom line. He introduced Bonterra, the first nationally distributed wine made with 100% organic grapes, placing Fetzer at the forefront of organic viticulture, with over 2,000 acres of wine farmed organically. Paul's experiences at Fetzer led him to publish True to Our Roots, Fermenting a Business Revolution, a book that I read and recommend. It sets forth the simple but powerful management principles that enabled Fetzer to become one of America's best-known wineries and an exemplar of sustainable business practices. Through his leadership at the California Wine Institute, Paul introduced the Code of Sustainable Wine Growing and chaired the institute from 2006 to 2007. He also served on President Clinton's Council on Sustainability, Businesses for Social Responsibility, and the Climate Group. He was chairman of the California Sustainable Wine Growers Alliance and received the Environmental Business Leader of the Year award from the California Planning and Conservation League in 2006. Paul has become a spokesperson and practitioner of regenerative wine growing. He serves on the board of the Regenerative Organic Alliance and farms his family-owned Dark Horse Ranch as a multifaceted certified biodynamic vineyard and regenerative farm, and as a founding partner of Truett-Hurst Winery. He is constantly seeking to enhance his understanding of the restorative capacity of the soil and the farm and its relationship to the restoration of the health of the planet's ecosystems. Enjoy. Paul, thank you so much for doing this. Welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be with you.
It's a real pleasure and an honor. I mean, I've been doing the Organic Wine Podcast now for over a couple of years, and I think if there's anybody who should have been a guest on this by now, it's you. And anybody who I think if we're talking organics in California, I feel like you are the person to talk to. Can you? Yeah, I will have read I will have introduced you, like I said. But there's so many ways we could approach this. I just wonder where you are in your life now, what you're caring about, what you're working with Truett-Hurst. You've got your own Dark Horse Ranch where you're doing, I believe, some viticulture there as well. What's on your plate right now that's really exciting you, that is, what you're all about, what you want to talk about?
Well, I just would mention two things. One is that farming organically and what I would say regeneratively, organically, we'll talk a little bit about that,
Yeah.
is um, is really intriguing, and continues to unfold. I used biodynamic practices for a long time. I chaired the board for Demeter, and um, they had a wonderful several years in just exploring biodynamic farming and reading Steiner and others, and which really opened up my eyes to a whole different way of looking at the farm, really more from the spiritual side or the spirit side. Steiner was one of those polymaths, and he spoke more often from or less often from the physical side, more often from the spirit side. So he saw things really very different than the world of agriculture does today, and
Yeah.
so it was a great place for me to build a new foundation for engaging without agriculture. Where I am today, along with the farming, is working with the Regenerative Organic Alliance, and I really think I've found a home there now. They say it's like my sort of maybe my fourth or fifth career, engaging in always all my I can't say all my life, but a good part of my life is really engaging in how I can make a difference not only in the industry but also in the sector of agriculture, but also trying to create a shift in the sustainability of the planet. Full well knowing that we're using more of the natural resources on the planet than the planet can provide. So but what I really like about the regenerative organic, I think it really speaks to farmers in a very different way. It opens up new conversations and new thinking that where biodynamics really didn't. And albeit it is on a platform of organic, which that in itself also is somewhat of a deterrent for some conventional farmers. But this whole movement to regenerative is nice to see, and I think it's piquing farmers' interest and curiosity more and more and more so. And so I think so that's my work now, and I'll put it in this context, Adam, is that I think there's this opportunity, and particularly with this organization that I work with, the Regenerative Organic Alliance, is to kind of reframe agriculture, recreate a new narrative for agriculture. I'll kind of suggest that the foundation for agriculture is really about the reductive approach. It's built on chemical farming. It's built on um, single products, focusing on them with lots of synthetic fertility, monocropping, maximizing productivity, and it just sort of ignores everything else. And when you're I've sort of been raised in this philosophy that diversity is really critical. You find yourself in this more biological approach to
Mm.
farming that creates a whole new challenge, but also requires a whole new language for people to step into, because it's a bit scary, and it needs to be a language that's different than the current agricultural language that we have today in order
Yeah.
to um, invite people into the conversation. I'll put it that way.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's hard to it is hard, I think, because it is coming at um, our objectives from a very different perspective than has been conventional agriculture for the last so many years. I, I in talking about organics, I should say that I sort of joke that this podcast is probably become something much bigger than just organics, because it's, I quickly realized organic is just that threshold that you cross as you're heading over into this other end of the spectrum. And now, really, I am enjoying exploring, coming at things from that other end of the spectrum, of really, like, I think what the way I would put it is, so much agriculture is seems like it is geared toward erasing or sterilizing an ecosystem so that our desired crops, can grow in a more laboratory like environment. So where our intentions and our programs are, sort of put on a blank slate, so to speak, rather than in working with an ecosystem that exists and finding its own abundance and enhancing it to better provide for human desires. Does that ring true with your experience and what you're talking
Yeah,
about?
yeah, yeah. I have sort of a
And
metaphor that I use. It's like I say, raising a organic or biodynamic vine is like raising a child, in the sense
uh-huh,
that when we raise our kids, and I think of my daughter when I say this. My daughter's name is Sasakaya.
uh-huh.
She's named after that amazing winery in
Yeah.
Italy, and I won't go through that story. But
Well, it's a
uh,
beautiful name anyway, regardless of
yes,
its
and
connections. Yeah.
in raising her, we quickly realized that we really couldn't uh, really move her in any particular direction. Really, what we could do is contribute to the environment that she grew up in.
Hmm.
So we wanted to create this healthy environment, good foods, or organic, ideally, um, nice schools, or healthy schools. She actually went to a Waldorf school for a while. Um, the opportunity to meet good kids, live in nice neighborhoods, have the opportunity to pick and choose with whatever she wanted. Whether it's sports, or music, any of the arts. But at the end of the day, the greatest hope was that she be fully expressed. So
Hmm.
we were focusing on the space in which she grew up, and her making her own decisions. And it's the same thing I'd suggest that for the grapevine. So rather than focusing on the vine itself, it's really focusing on the space in which the plant grows. So providing a lot of diversity, flora and fauna, whether it's what nature provides or adding domestic animals into the farm, and also focusing a lot on the soil, and that the life energy and the life forces and the complexity of life there, such that the vine sends its roots down deep, and it's really extracting the expression of that place, fully extracting the expression of that place without the interference of chemicals, but where you're feeding it, you're thinking of it as an entity in of itself, and so that it uh, so that it recognizing that it has a personality, that we would say terroir, but I'm
Okay.
suggesting that it's something sort of bigger than terroir, or more of expanded description of terroir, that really takes into consideration these life forces. So and at the end of the day, once again, our greatest hope is that those vines are fully expressed.
Yeah.
They the maximum of expression that we could possibly hope for, and as wine makers, wine growers, that's the ultimate, because that's what we look for. That's what we search for. No matter where we might buy grapes or source grapes or grow grapes.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many things in that. Does this element of does that get at the spirituality that you were talking about? This sort of idea that I imagine it- that you who have had lots of experience at a sort of corporate level wine business, one of the biggest companies in the U.S. and in that wine world, I imagine, and working with the farmers that you work with at the scale that you're working with, this idea of spirituality is probably less popular, and I'm wondering how, but I feel this too, which is like there is that part of me that is like wants to be science based, wants to be evidence based, wants to see data, wants to base decisions on that, but then knowing that nature is so complex that we could literally never understand all of the connections that are happening at one time. We could never replicate them. We could never explain them. There's this sort of, I like to use the word magic rather than spirituality, because spirituality can be, I don't know, magic can be loaded as well. But it's that something that is beyond our ability to understand, whether it's understandable or not. It's maybe understandable in pieces, but not as a totality because of the complexity and size of it. Is that, I mean, can you speak to that at all? Is that what you're getting at a little bit?
Sure. I mean, I think it kind of rephrase it a little bit. And yes, I do talk about spirituality in the farm. As a matter of fact, I've got a group of speaking to, oh gosh, I don't know, end of next month, I guess, about just about that, because that was their particular request. But I put it in the context of farming in service of life.
Hmm.
So the
Yeah.
the life of the vine, the life of the microbes, the life of the flora and the fauna, those elements at the end of the day, if you're in tune with that, you're also in tune with what the vine wants to say. So I'm going to use a couple additional metaphors here. Is that um, I say the vineyard's like a living organism,
Hmm.
in the sense that it has a respiratory system, a circulatory system, a nervous system, a digestive system, and the nervous system really is the farmer, and the farmer's role is to listen for what the farm wants to say or the vineyard wants to say. How does it really want to express itself? Because the farm can't do that itself. It can't build the framework. It's not a natural system, so to speak. It's
Right.
in nature, but it's not like a redwood forest that you don't have to worry about the redwood forest. It's in charge. It's figured it out. It's been doing it for a couple thousand years or more, and it's self-sustaining. But in a farm system, we have to have this what's so-called farmer listener that works with the farm and listens for what it wants to be, any more than the child.
Right.
And in that dynamic, this respiratory system, I say that at the farm breathes out in the morning and in back at night. So
Mm.
this breathing out of the soil and into the atmosphere, and then from the atmosphere back in. And then the same thing during the moon cycles. Same
Mm.
same thing. The levity and the gravity that comes as a result of those changes in the moon cycles, and then of course on an annual basis with the seasons.
Mm.
So out in the spring and back when. So we're in the down into the earth phase in this fall season. So the vines are going through its dying cycle, and the energy is moving back into the soil. The circulatory system in the vineyard or on a farm. I use the terminology farm when I'm speaking of vineyards, because
Sure. Yeah.
you, like me, we've got all these other living forces on the farm, whether it's feral cats or chickens or sheep or goats and etc. So the those so that's that energy that comes as a result of the um, that cycle of the of that flow of the breathing process. The circulatory system is really organized around water movement. So,
Mm.
like in our bodies, it's blood. That's a circulatory system. So the health of that, that's why doctors do these gazillion different tests in order to make sure that the blood system is healthy and viable. So the same thing with water. We can pay attention to every farm's different. Every vineyard's different. I have one. My home vineyard, Dark Horse Vineyards, is a hillside. It's got about a 700-foot elevation from bottom to top. And so the water has a particular movement as it goes through the soil and makes its way down and into the pond or into the creek, whichever way it's going, or deep down into the roots of the vines. And that's a critical thing to know about and critical piece to understand, particularly when um, a lot of our focus is in the health of those microbes or invertebrates. Maybe we can talk a little bit about invertebrates too.
Yeah.
And then the other piece is the digestive system. So the microbes digesting of organic matter in the soil is a really, really critical thing to know and understand and support by virtue of using either animals grazing in the vineyards, and they're fertilizing by virtue of the manure that they're laying down, or the cover crops, maybe with the green manure that comes as a result of this big green kind of floral mass that's created, and then of course the nitrogen that finds its way down into the roots of the cover crop, and then eventually is released into the soil for the grapevine itself, or the compost, which is it really is a very significant and important way of restoring maybe that the soil that's lost as a result of the rains and the rainfall, and but also it's a sort of a jump start. It gets the biome in the ground kind of re-energized and diversified, um, and so that digestive system that comes above the ground with the animals, with the invertebrates beneath the ground, and then of course all of the microbial activity. Um, so that's how I look at the farm now, and that's
Yeah.
how we engage as to what we think's necessary for a particular block, for a certain Cabernet block in a particular area that is on a particular rootstock and has a particular orientation to the mountain. Those are important components inside of what we call terroir. But there's so many other dynamics that are critical to consider. Particularly with climate change. Climate change is like,
Yeah.
holy smokes, that's a real game changer. So building structures that help the vine be more resilient, and I don't think that there's much more we can do probably than finding ways to um, build that resilience both above the ground and then below the ground, such that the vine can find what it needs on an ongoing basis, and it becomes sort of somewhat self-sustaining, self-regulating, which is just the absolute most ideal situation.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple things. I read your book last night, True to Our Roots,
Oh wow.
about your time at Fetzer. um, which was a great read, and really I'd recommend it for anybody in wine and in wine, the wine business. I There's a couple things from it. One of which is what you were just talking about. I guess I really enjoyed this idea of. I mean, you mentioned us farmers as part of that vineyard in the sense that we're just one of the systems. In that sense, we're part of that terroir as well, and our human culture is part of that. Is it? I guess maybe how that relates to what I thought about from your book was: is this something that you can see at scale, at the scale that a Fetzer works at?
Well, yeah. I don't really see any problem with it. I mean, one is organic farming is fairly easy, um, and when you add in the regenerative, that's easy too. And we're discovering more and more practices and techniques that make it more comfortable for the farmer to realize that they can farm organically, whether it's on a large scale or a small scale. Uh, the you know we were we've been we were born into a system that is a different kind of system. It's the conventional system, the reductive type approach that calls you to believe that the only way to do it is to go into the shed and pull a chemical off the shed in order to deal with this insect or that insect. Where there's this area that we have to this let me see this we have to build an understanding and appreciation of another way, the biological way. Now, what I would say is from that perspective, we're really not there yet. I mean, it took, I don't know, hundreds of years to develop and build the conventional system, and it won't take as long. I don't believe. I just read a quote from Alan York, who was sort of the famous mentor in that regard of biodynamics, as well as this concept of regenerative. It won't take as long as it did to build the conventional system as it will for the biologic, because we have so many more tools that are available to us, and
Right.
we we can. I think we're going to be more quick to adopt these new practices that are starting to show up. Some of them that I mentioned. So yeah, I think it's fine on. I mean, I took a 500-acre piece of property in, gosh, it was probably 95. And it was very hilly. It was like my guys, my farming team, that really, can't we just use Roundup like 1 or 2 years? And I said, no, you can't. And it was almost, it almost looked impossible for them, but they made it work. 79 distinct blocks of, depending on where you were on the hillside, whether you're facing one direction or the other. Um, and so I don't think it's I don't think it's that much of a reach. I remember when Gallo first started, they had an 800-acre piece of property in Sonoma County that they started out as organic, and they got nervous, and they went to Roundup, and now they're moving away from it again now. So I
Yeah.
think we're just feeling more comfortable with the tools that are available.
Yeah, I like that story from your book about how bleach was eliminated, where they were just like, well, how are we going to clean it? And I mean, it was basically like at a staff meeting, it came out that there was no more bleach in the winery, and you were like, well, how are you cleaning these things? And they were sort of like, well, we haven't figured that out. But we just knew that we had to get rid of the bleach, And
Yeah,
it's sort of like they made the decision, and that was all. I mean, that's how you. That's that's how you move forward. You just decide to stop doing it, and then you will find a solution. You have to find a solution at that point. But if you keep relying on that crutch, so to speak, um, it will make that transition harder. You won't be as committed to finding a solution if you have that sort of in your back pocket to pull out when the going gets tough, kind of thing. Um,
Exactly.
yeah,
Exactly.
I mean, you mentioned climate change, and I just you sort of also mentioned the difficulties that probably lie ahead for conventional agriculture. It seems like there's an expiration date, really, to the way that we've been doing things, both in terms of what our soils can sustain, but also in the impact that is coming as a result of the farming that we still continue to do. Although the wine industry seems like it's, I don't know. Maybe that's a question for you. Do you think that there has been a shift in the wine industry in your lifetime, and do you see more acceptance and more heading in that direction, in a better direction?
Well, I think so. We're seeing more and more uh, certified organic farmers popping up in the wine industry, which is really, really, really very encouraging. So I read an interesting blog by, or actually maybe it's an article by Pam Strayer, who really gets
Mm,
around to the industry in this regard, and she's really like a dog on a bone. She won't let go, and she really is holding people's feet to the fire if they talk about being sustainable or regenerative or organic. She doesn't let them get away with much at all.
right.
So and there's some really interesting changes. I think I mentioned Gallo's really moving as quickly as they can, and um, KJ is a really very big farmer, and
Yeah.
they're doing the same thing. They've spent a lot of time with me up in the farm, up my farm, and I think that they're seeing that there is a change to the future. What's really hard, it's really hard. I mean, it's even for myself. I've been in the conversation and understanding and appreciation of what climate change is about for quite a long time. I was on the board for the climate group, oh gosh, maybe 20, 25 years ago. And uh, we talked about these things that were going to happen, but it would, on some level, I got it, but it keeps unfolding for me as to this incredible impact. I mean, the fires, the drought in my particular area are just up in Sonoma and Mendocino County are
Yeah.
dramatic.
You guys have
Just
had some crazy heat this fall as well, right?
oh God, yeah, the heat 118 degrees at one point, and yet going out into the vineyards the following days, it's green leaves and they're happy and they're healthy and they didn't suffer at all. So what one of the things I'll mention is that over the period of time we've spent farming over the last I've been farming for 25 years and longer. I've been longer as a winemaker is probably 45 years. But the impact of increasing organic matter in the soil is really significant. When you increase the organic matter by 1% in your soil, you increase the water holding capacity by 25,000 gallons per acre. So it
Yeah.
really, really makes a significant difference on my home vineyard. We've went from 1 to 1.5 to 4.5%, and so with that, we were able to take a hillside farm and um, and dry farm,
Right.
uh,
Right.
and but here's a story that this really one of my ahas was not this winter, but the winter before. I was asked by a very, very large farmer. It was an 800 acre vineyard on a 2,500 acre piece of ground, and he wanted me to come out and see what he was doing and ask me for advice. He wanted to know whether he should cultivate or not that particular year because it was a drought. It was a drought year. And as we're driving around, it's snowing, and and we're at a higher elevation. And he pulled out a shovel and he took a shovelful and turned it over, and I couldn't believe the number of worms. Now, I don't think much about worms. I mean, I read a story about 4 or 5 years ago, a guy named Claude Bourguignon, um, who's a sort of a farming consultant in all kinds of farming, but also in viticulture in Europe, Frenchman. And he spoke about worms and the importance of worms and the values that they had in a vineyard. And I'm thinking, oh God, you got to be kidding me! I never even crossed my mind. And then this sort of reinforced it. So I went back to my hillside farm where I had decided about 5, maybe 6 years prior to that I was going to cultivate every other row. So one row remained permanent over that 6 year period of time, and then the next row was the one I would cultivate in order to plant my cover crop seed.
Mm.
Well, I would shovel full in the permanent cover, turn it over, and there's like 20 worms in a shovel full.
Right.
And then in the cultivated, it was about 9 or 10 worms, sort of on average. So I just thought, oh my God, these worms are magic. The way they're the workforce. They're
Yeah.
the workforce that is, breaking down that organic and putting it in a state of humus, so that the microbes have access and the roots have access. So that kind of thinking and that kind of shift is really, I think, what's ahead of us. And I use that in that story in the context of it builds
Yeah.
resilience and restorative value, and you can go beyond 4 or 5% organic matter in the vineyard. It's there's no reason why we can't. Really, most vineyards are, because of the cultivation, or maybe as high as 2, but generally hardly ever higher than that.
Right. So that sounds like an argument for no-till as well, what you discovered
Mm,
with the worms.
absolutely. My son's taking the whole vineyard no-till this year,
Right on.
and that's a kind of a scary thought, but it was a scary thought for me when I just took part of it, and primarily because I grew up with a lot of old Italian farmers as my mentors when it came to farming, and they talked about the idea of cultivating and the importance of sort of building this fluffy layer on the top of the soil. And they used the analogy of it's like insulation.
Hmm.
Anymore, you put in insulation in your house to keep it cool, or when it's hot, and or holding the moisture in.
Right.
But we're finding that there's a dynamic that we didn't know about, and
Yeah.
that I just described.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
I've heard that as well. Um, yeah. Even called like a dust mulch or something like that.
yeah, they used to
Um,
absolutely call that. It was hell walking through when you were
right.
and particularly some farmers, they would do it so much that your foot would sink about 8 inches in it, and
Right.
just like come out with just dirt down in your boots.
um, well, I guess the other thing that I think was a big part of, at least towards the end of your book, was this how we have this ability to shape the future, create the future. And I just wonder what your vision is now. That maybe you're not in that position that you were at Fetzer, but I mean, obviously you're part of other great organizations that have a big reach. But maybe it's a more general vision that you have for wine in general. I'm just curious if you, or maybe it's predictions about the future or your vision for the future.
Oh well, okay. This gets a little dire, actually.
Yeah. No, I'm right there with you.
It gets pretty dire. You know, we live. Let me see. We lived in a past where we could kind of count on certain weather dynamics, and those weather dynamics. Those weather dynamics of the past don't predict the future. They just don't.
Yeah.
And the emphasis, Farmer's Almanac. I was like, I mean, it really doesn't. Farmer's Almanac really doesn't make much sense anyway. I mean, it's beautiful to read, um, but the direction when we look at trends and we listen to Greg Jones, who's the fame, really a huge contribution to the farming community, the wine growing community, and by all the work that he's done as a climatologist. I want to call him a weatherman, but a climatologist. And so we see that it really is changing. And over the years, I can remember as a young man uh, just being so grateful that I could get the sugars in my grapes to 23 and a half to 24, and that was optimum, and
Yeah.
the tannins were resolved and they were ripe, and so was the fruit, and the flavors were great. And I just happened, I opened a bottle of an 81 Dolan Cabernet just the other day with some friends, and I hadn't really tasted it in a while. And I also had a bottle of 82 Latour. Now,
Hmm.
82 Latour was freaking amazing, just an
Yeah.
amazing wine.
Yeah.
And my 81 stood up to that Latour. It just I don't want to pat myself on the back and wax out too eloquent about it, but that was a time frame where you could make wines a particular way. They lasted a long time. But in today's world, one is winemakers are looking for a different flavor profile, but we're kind of forced into this space where it takes a while for the tannins to ripen relative to the flavors, and so you end up with very high sugar fruit,
Right.
um, and it's more difficult. It's definitely more difficult to manage. So the but that's moving so quickly, and it's moved so quickly, a 20, 30 year time frame in the in the history of the 7,000 years of history of wine, or the history of man, or the history of agriculture. It's just nothing. And so when we know that the CO2 levels, um, 50 to so maybe 60, 70 years ago, or 280 parts per million um, in our atmosphere, and now they're I don't know, 414 or something like that. So CO2 is definitely climbing in the atmosphere, and it's as we know,
Yeah.
it's just the burning of fossil fuels. Well, that's changing the climate, and it will continue to change, and it will continue to cause these catastrophic weather events. And so that's what's super hard to predict, and we have to become resolved that that's the case. And so therefore, what? Therefore, do I stop farming in a particular area, or do I farm something different in that area, or do I recognize I don't have enough water in that area? And so there's these. One is to acknowledge the change, and then start to try to put yourself in the place out in the future, whether it's 30 or 50 years. In today's world, that's probably about right when you think of legacy farming. So my son and I work really very close together. I'm 72. He's not quite 50. He's got another, I don't know, 30 years maybe or something. We're all living longer
Yeah.
now. He's going to live to 100. I might live to 75 or something.
Yeah.
And so his frame of reference is starting to shift, and we talk a lot about it. And uh, but it's not going to be so it's not going to be easy. Uh, Farming in itself is a challenge just with weather, but now the weather is being impacted by climate change, and we don't know what to expect, and we don't know how to organize ourselves, and so we have to um, uh, uh, um, put ourselves in a different mindset in order to um, explore different ways of farming.
Yeah. Is it? I see what you're saying. I mean, it sounds like a case for adaptability, um, and just creative thinking, problem solving.
Yeah.
Do you do you see a? I mean, do you see us drinking the same wine, or wine in even Northern California being what it is now in 10 years?
Well, yeah,
10, maybe not 25 though.
yeah. 25, probably not.
Yeah,
10, yes. The cycle of a vine these days is maybe 25 years.
yeah,
With the advent of this change of temperature, we're creating a different environment for predatory insects um,
mm,
to
yeah,
start to show up, and that's a whole nother conversation. And I don't know if we can win,
yeah,
but uh, we're human beings that we're not going to let go. It's not our nature. It's our nature to be creative, and it's our nature to explore. And so we'll find ways to adapt. And
yeah,
so it might be different varieties that are more rugged, more adaptable. Probably varieties that we don't even have now, um, or different clonal variations. Um, um, Aubert de Villon writes beautifully about um, this importance of sort of identifying plants that exist on the farm that have particular traits, and then repropagating them. There's that wonderful book Terroir and the Winemaker,
hmm,
and he does a great job with that. And I think that's going to come into play, developing new varieties or adapting the certain clones that maybe already exist. Of course, rootstock has a lot to say in it. Vine direction, uh, canopy management, all of those things that are adaptations that we can integrate that I think will
yeah.
help us along the way.
Can I ask you, do you think a small producer, uh, I mean, do you have any recommendations for a small producer in the wine business, knowing what you know and having worked at the scale that you've worked at, in terms of, how to be successful, how to have an impact, or how to just survive?
Well, I think the biggest challenge for small producers, and Truett Hurst is definitely a small producer,
Yeah.
uh, the biggest challenge there is just finding voice. Um, yeah, and the dynamics of wine sales has changed so much from the distribution wholesale model that I you know, obviously I was deep into with a large company, and
Yeah.
then moving to smaller brands that I had. Sauvignon Republic was a brand that I created that we created a different model, and Truthurst is all direct to consumer now.
Okay.
Um, those those so you know, so those are great models, and we've developed a lot of techniques and a lot of systems, and we've built into our plan a lot of communication, and so we use what we call e-commerce, just it's sort of e-blast, and then we have wine clubs, and then we have our
Yeah.
tasting room where we bring people in. We have tours, we have high-end tastings, all of those things, all of those trappings, one might say, and those are all really very important. But it's a crowded market.
Yeah.
It's a very crowded market. So the expectation of size and for the small producers is probably a critical discussion to have. And how do you make it at a smaller size, and is it viable? At the end of the day,
Yeah.
the proprietor has to decide is it viable or not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is tough.
Well, it
Well,
is tough. Yeah. Yeah.
all around.
Oh,
Well, I
geez.
know I need to let you go, so
Yeah.
I want to thank you for the career of service toward sustainable wine, a sustainable wine industry that you've given all of us here in the U.S. It's real. I mean, a lot of stuff that I'm very grateful that you've done to move the needle. I think in big ways. So thanks for that, and thanks for this conversation. Maybe we can do it again.
Well, thanks. This was super fun. I really appreciate it. The opportunity.
Thanks, Pi. Appreciate it. Appreciate you. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. Here's something to think about. How would your business change if you immediately adopted a policy of not accepting anything but regeneratively organic fruit as the basis for the wine that you make and sell? What kind of fruit could you use where you are now if you adopted this policy today? What are the elements that would make it possible for you to have this policy, and can you affect any of them today? Something to think about, and thanks again for listening.